So my name is Roland. I do events and publicity for Educate Ventures Research. As you all know, there is a waiting room for each of our webinars. So whilst I'm doing this introduction, I will also be just doing a little bit of admin with the waiting room to let everybody in. So if you see me sort of look away for a second or pause, then that's what I'm doing. Just a reminder also that you're all automatically muted when entering the room. And I will be switching off any cameras in the audience just so that none of us will be distracted from our speakers. Today's webinar is a continuation of our education reform series that Educate and its friends and colleagues have began several months ago off the back of a joint statement on education reform issued to the UK government. We will be looking at various international education models from around the world and asking questions about their successes, failures, challenges, deployments from the perspective of teachers, government representatives, entrepreneurs, international organizations, and we have a huge cast of stars who are very kindly providing their expertise and their time today. To remind everybody, this is an ongoing webinar series exploring education reform from many angles that Educate has been running, and during the course of today's sessions, I'll be putting the details of our next webinar, which will focus on SEND and vulnerable learners in the chat window. And if you like today's webinar, then I encourage you to sign up for the next one. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat and we will get to them if the panel has time. Now to give the panel as much time as possible to speak, I'll hand over to our friend and colleague, Lord Jim Knight, who I am again delighted has come to MC the event once more. Jim, when you are ready, please feel free to take it away.
Thanks very much, Roland. I am more than ready, and we'll pitch straight in because we don't have that much time and we've got lots of people I want to hear from, and delighted that we've got such a rich cast of people from all over the world sat in time zones from 9 p.m. at night to 8 a.m. in the morning. And I will just introduce you rather than ask you to introduce yourselves, because that just takes too long. And if my panel could just wave when I say their name, it'll at least be entertaining for everyone. So, and for those that don't know me, I am I was working at TES. I'm now working in the wonderful portfolio world of being an advisor to all sorts of different people, and as a legislator in the House of Lords in the UK Parliament. And then we're joined by Ricardo Schneider, the Partner and Chief Scientific Officer at Square Learning Technologies. He's in Rio. James, how do I pronounce your surname? I've forgotten.
DL.
DL.
Yep.
I knew that. Who's the head of school at NIST International School in Bangkok in Thailand. Ulla Illison is the Director General of Education and Youth Board in Estonia. Jane Hunter is Associate Professor for Teacher Education at the University of Technology in Sydney, so she wins the prize for being up latest. Gavin Dykes is the Programme Director for the Education World Forum. Udo Wiechert is the Senior Director for Public Sector and Strategic Accounts for Filewave in Germany. Hugo Fonseca is the founder of Doin in Portugal. Richard Kalata, the CEO of ISTE in the States. And finally, I think finally, unless there's someone I don't know about, Cecilia, I've not mentioned you. Should I be mentioning you too? No. I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know if you're on the panel or not. Samson Samland Bowling is Director for Open Energy Labs in Zambia. So welcome everybody. Where I wanted to start was really internationally, there's so much that we can learn from each other. And I'll come on to whether or not we got the right connections to help people to learn from each other. So Cecilia is on the panel. Corinne's telling me, sorry, Cecilia, I didn't actually know that. So welcome. You have the privilege of introducing yourself. But I think, are you in Uruguay? Have I got that right?
Yes, you got it right.
Cool. And give us the one sentence summary.
Well, I'm a teacher and I've been working in communication technology and learning for already 25 years. I worked at Discovery Kids, and I'm a Now I founded also an NGO to help rural schools, teachers and children here in Uruguay. It's already running for 11 years. And I've worked for the one laptop per child implementation here in Uruguay for nationwide strategy. So that's what I do.
Brilliant. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as you can see, we've got such a wealth of international voices. And I want to start with thinking about whether there are models internationally that have been working really well, kind of regardless of the pandemic. Let's pretend that that's not been happening for the last year or so. We'll come back to that. And to some extent, whether those models that have worked have been strategic ones that have been driven top down, how much they've been organic and growing from the bottom, how much it's about money and how much it's about mindset. I'm conscious that I'm littering the conversation already with false dichotomies, but let's start with you, Gavin. You're the Education World Forum brings all the education and ministers of the world together. So you have this unique oversight onto what they're all up to.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go. I wouldn't want to pick on anybody, as you find great examples all over the world, individual examples. You'll find systems that are doing a bit better than others. But I kind of put it with thinking as we are in relation to the context of technology and COVID and those sorts of things. I think it's the things that I think are particularly important in education. How much do we care about equity? How much do we care about resilience and how resilient people are within the system? So can students learn by themselves? Can teachers teach by themselves? And what are the communities like them? How much do we support student and teacher agency within our education systems? Do we recognize the real student context, or are we always teaching to some average? And as we know, there is no average. Nobody is ever the average. So how well are we actually contextualizing education for those that we're working with? And how well are we optimizing the technology tools that we have? And then one final thing, how big a plan do we have? Is everyone buying into some sort of plan of how we're taking education forward? And the reason I mean, it made me think of Kierkegaard. It's easier to steer a boat when it's moving, and so when you're hit by a pandemic, it's easier then to move into looking after things when you're talking about the dangers of the pandemic and what gives us. I think the dangers are that we actually have a double hit on equity. So what the OECD has been saying is that there's a correlation between those systems that are poor and the amount of time that schools are closed. So, sorry, one last thing. I think the biggest lesson we might learn from technology is actually in the design of the internet. And one of the things that the internet has been designed to is to be resilient. And that's about no node having greater importance than other nodes. And therefore there's a sort of equity in that. And when something goes down, you get the traffic going round so that you can keep the internet going. And perhaps we should think about that in terms of education.
I'm not going to let you distract me about the problems that the internet has driven in equity alongside its equitable founding principles. But instead, Ulla, Estonia is doing really well. What's the model that you've got that you think is driving that success?
Yes, I think that what we literally can say from Estonia, that our schools have not been closed down during the pandemic. I think it took like, I would say 2 to maybe 4 weeks to move into the virtual school environment. And I think that this has been, of course, not occasional. So I think that if now to bring maybe some learning points, but also to disclose some challenges, what we currently now see going further, is that at first I think that we have had luck that usage of the technology and digitalization has been priority for our nation and governments, I think, for more than 20 years. So I think we have e-government solutions, e-elections, and everything already for more than 10 years. And also, I think in the educational part, I think that development of the respective infrastructure, it means exactly that internet or availability of or access to the solutions was actually there already for, let's say, almost 20 years ago. And it has been very much collaboration support from the state, but also by local municipalities. So, and also development of the digital learning materials has been, of course, accelerated during the past years quite a lot. So, and I think that not only infrastructural part, but I think that I think this is also a lesson for the future, that simultaneous development of the skills, because technology itself doesn't do the work. It's very much related with the capability of the, of course, learners, teachers. I would say the key crucial point actually from the COVID pandemic part, and I think that this is a constant and systematic development of the skills, encouragement of the teachers, and this is of course the big chain. Of course, you have the school leader, you have the local municipality, and how actually to support all this development. So I think that, and another maybe the very lucky part has been that I think that this collaboration between public and private partnerships, but maybe we can also touch a bit later as well. Almost the 95% of the parents, teachers, and students were connected via e-diary. So it means that actually this information flow between the school and the parents and the students was rather smooth already in the usage for 10 years or so. And I think that this is something what has become quite a big asset. And if to think now how to engage more teachers and all those practices into the future outlook, I think it's a really great and important asset to keep in mind.
Thank you, and congratulations on not sounding too smug about how successful things have been in Estonia. Richard, ISTE's International Society for Technology and Education, you've got a global view, and you've also got all of that experience in the US in the Office for EdTech in the White House, back in the day, overseeing 14,000 different school districts all doing different things. What's your take on the models that are working?
Well, first of all, great to be here with you all today, and thank you for the chance. But even in the way you asked the question, actually tease it up quite effectively, which is all those different models that we see. And so when we look at, ISTE works and we work in 75 countries, but even in the US, as many of you are aware, it's a very decentralized system. So every one of those 14,000 districts could be doing it in a completely different way and are doing it in a very different way. And so one of the things that I can tell you is there are some trends that we get to see as we look across all of those different implementations, all of those different approaches. And one of the trends that has become very clear, both as we look across different countries that we work in and as we look across these different districts, is the schools and school networks that have prioritized teacher learning and teacher training and teacher professional development, whatever term we want to use, have always, I think almost to every example I can think of, have seen a fairly successful experience during the pandemic. And as we're coming out of the pandemic, are starting to see some really interesting gains in some different areas. And if we have time, I can talk more about them. But to stay focused on this point for now, the flip side is that there are countries, there are in the US, there are states and districts that have focused on the cables and wires problem. And they have said, we are going to get devices in the hands of every kid. We're going to get connectivity solved. And which, by the way, we need to do that. Please don't misunderstand this.
Can I just pause you and be slightly embarrassed that
yes,
I've got someone insistently knocking on my door,
yeah,
and I'm the only one in the house. So if I can ask you to keep talking and hand over to Samson, who I want to hear the African perspective. I'll still be listening, but I'm going to answer the door.
We're going to talk about Lord Jim Knight for a while now that he can't defend himself. No. So anyway, the point, this is COVID life right here, right? So the point being that the schools and the school networks that have been focused on getting the devices and the connectivity, and what I was trying to say is, it is not to say that that is not important. It is extremely important that we have connectivity. It is extremely important that we have devices. But in the districts and schools and states and countries even where that was the focus, once that was done, they said, whew, glad we got that done. Problem solved, right? And the learning experience was a train wreck. It was a disaster. And in the places where the focus was, yeah, we got to get some connectivity done, right? But even in the places where the connectivity and the devices were a little bit clunky and still maybe not quite as good as we wanted, but there was focus on helping the teaching staff learned how to really think differently, not just scan worksheets and put them on an LMS, but really think about using the devices and that connectivity in ways that were inclusive, that were empowering for the students. That's where we saw the difference. And it's amazing how stark the difference is. And it's amazing how few people are calling that out. There's still so much focus, even in the US, on, well, let's just get more devices and connectivity. And it's like an echo chamber. It's like crickets when we're talking about, and what are we doing to make sure the teachers are prepared to use it in transformational ways?
Absolutely. So Samson, you're our lone voice from Africa, where whenever I talk to people like yourself, I get excited by your leapfrogging opportunity to sort of miss out lots of the mistakes that we've been making over years here in the richer parts of the world. Where are you trying to leap to?
Sure. So first of all, I should just make clear I'm definitely not the voice of Africa, by any means. You know, I consider myself as part of the African diaspora, but not kind of directly from the continent. So I should just make that clear from me off.
Apologies, I've got
no worries.
I got distracted by the word Zambia. And,
that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So no, I think in terms of leapfrogging, I think there's a massive potential. I think what we've kind of found is that there are all of these opportunities to base, in particular, kind of project-based learning on problems that people actually face within their communities. And so what we do is we teach people we teach physics and electronics by building an electricity supply. And so what we've kind of seen is that there are all of these amazing opportunities where people see these problems that they have around them that we, you know, in the kind of richer countries have already solved. You know, everyone has electricity, so learning how to build an electricity supply doesn't quite make sense. Whereas there's all of this kind of, particularly on the STEM side of things, there's all of this infrastructure that actually still needs to be built that can happen at quite a simple and fundamental level that you can actually really build into the learning experience. And we've kind of found that the reception for that has been really, really great. And we've managed to get great support from the Zambian government in terms of kind of rolling this out. So I think that's kind of one of the key things that we've come across. And I think the other thing that we've kind of seen is that when you go to industry to look for skills, when setting education policy, a lot of these bodies will go to industry to find out what are the skills that you need. And what you'll find is that they all want operations and maintenance people. They don't want the really high skilled labor because that already exists in the rich countries where those companies are based. Right. And so what we've kind of tried to communicate is that when you're setting education policy, particularly in developing countries, you really have to be quite visionary in terms of what are the actual skills that we need to have here in the country, and try and kind of almost ignore what those big international companies are telling you that the skills that they need. And obviously this is changing slightly now with kind of Twitter, for example, starting to base its offices in Ghana, for example. But that's one of the big trends that we've seen that we've kind of been trying to push forward a little bit.
Thank you. And then before I move on to my next sort of theme, Cecilia, just from your point of view in Uruguay, particularly, I guess, picking up what Richard was saying about we can obsess about devices, but in the end, it's about the development of the teaching and the pedagogy that really adds value. In the work that you've done with one laptop per child, for example, how have you balanced that off in your country?
Well, I have two hats. I think scalability changes the effect, as it was mentioned before, how you manage scale and how you can address context. As Richard was saying, it's completely different when you are managing a whole country, when you are managing different districts. And as Ulla said, the phenomenon is completely different when there is a coherent system that has a vision for the learning and also an agenda of technology that goes with it. And there are some countries that have that separated. One is taking care of the plugs, and as they were said, and of the devices, and then other people are taking care of the learning. When that happens, there is this disconnection that kind of like the government has this illusion that the teacher will be able to put together. They will put together the coherent of who chose this device anyway, or who chose this app anyway. And now I have to do the learning experience without any knowledge of how to design that. And I have to take all this learning experience and so all these different technological pieces to another ground that is the family ground that also have another ecosystem of technology, also have completely different cultures. So who is putting everything together in a way that this makes any sense? So that happened in Uruguay. I worked for this implementation, so it is groundbreaking, because now we have what Ulla was saying, that Estonia has for already 10 years, that everyone has a laptop, everybody has an LMS platform, everybody has a connectivity. But so the state assumes that everyone is connected. So as Richard was saying, okay, problem solved. And the teachers feel totally alone and very overwhelmed, because now it's on them. Even though they know only 50% of the children really have technology, and that they know that one reality is that they solve the connectivity in the school, but actually not in the home. So there is where the equity part, as Gavin was saying, strikes hard, because the system is saying we were successful, we are providing equity, and the teachers know that's not the truth, and that then they feel overcharged with the burden of actually not only keep providing the learning connection and the emotional, sustain all the families and the children, but also to provide that equity that everybody is hoping them to achieve. So at the NGO, we tried a completely different approach that was what Samson was saying about first ask. What technology do you have? First ask. Don't assume, first ask. So we map what the teachers had, what the families had, and what was the reality, without any judgment, without you were supposed to have. Okay, do you have a phone? Okay, great. What is the percentage of phones in those schools? What is the percentage of connectivity? Do you have to climb a hill to connect? How much time do you have? And after that, what we did was, what are you already doing? What is your starting point from a teacher point of view? So then what we did was made suggestions. We did capacity building programs, making suggestions of where they were already doing to hire the game on learning design. And that is how we keep on unveiling that. And we got 95% of assistance to more than 30 gatherings that way. And we were able to provide equity. But without that ecosystem that makes sense for the teachers and make it a satisfactory experience for the child, I think we are only just making a lot of fun.
Thank you. I love that you are asking people the technology they already got. In my country, we have a Secretary of State for Education who thinks that mobile phones are evil and should be banned from education. But there you go. Ulla, you want to come in very quickly, and then I need to move the conversation on. And you'll be unmuted. There you go.
Just a very short comment here. I think it was very powerful summary by Cecilia regarding that actually hard or software, it's actually not enough. You need to have, let's say, also capability to use those different tools. But I think one aspect what I just add on here is that what we understood now here in Estonia as well, that we have had now for almost 5 years also the network of educational technologists in the schools who actually do understand the pedagogical part, but also understand the tools. And they are on site helping encouraging and supporting teachers how to use this software and hardware. And this is what we understood, that, for example, the future schools should be equipped 100% by those people, actually, just to get this very quickly rolled out, any change what we need, because it doesn't happen overnight just like that.
An instant comment, Samson. I saw you.
Here we go. Yeah, I just wanted to just a very nice summary quote by the technologist and educator Alan Kay, who said, particularly around IT education, if you want to have more people to learn how to play the piano, you don't just put a piano in every classroom. You have to teach. You have to teach people how to use it. I just thought that's a nice little summary of what was being said there.
Thank you. Now I want to come to you next, Jane. I think to just explore, yes, your reflections, but in particular, I'm interested in whether anyone is doing enough. And people like Gavin are doing a great job in bringing ministers together. And we, during COVID, we're doing a lot of this Zoom type conversation, but is there enough that's connecting countries and jurisdictions together to learn from each other with the right approach of humility and listening?
Thanks, Jim. And I just wanted to, before I started, to acknowledge the country on which I'm speaking. And we have a strong tradition of welcome to country and acknowledgement to country. And as a non-Indigenous person, I live on Darug country, which is one of the most ancient lands in the world, a history of over 50,000 years. And that land was never ceded. And we still are not able to bring our Indigenous people into their rightful place into our community. So I just wanted to acknowledge our Indigenous people on Darug country. Australia being an island, stating the obvious, the pandemic has touched us very lightly in comparison to the rest of the world. And so in the state, we have a series of states and territories. We have a federal government, but we also have state level governments. And so this has caused a whole range of different challenges. And I think in the state that I live, which is New South Wales, which is where Sydney is, in a large metropolitan city like Sydney, the maximum number of weeks that students actually were doing learning from home, if you like, was 8 weeks. So it really is a very different story to the rest of you. And of course, in the US, where you are, Richard, many children have actually lost more than a year of schooling. So in a way, it seems a bit trite, whatever I have to add to the conversation, because we really have experimented with different types of technologies. Certainly at a state level, there's been some recent research around reading and writing skills by some colleagues of mine. So I can speak to those points perhaps a little bit later on. But Australia generally, in terms of education, we have a big problem with equity. We have many children at the very top, but there's a very long tail. So even within a seemingly, first world city like Sydney, we still have families where there may not be any digital devices. And if the digital device is there, it would have to be shared amongst all the children in the family. And so if you're in your final year of school and you've got brothers and sisters who are in other years, then obviously the priority would be on you to be able to as the older child in the family, if you like, to command the use of that one digital device in a household. So,
and here in London, Jane, we have families who have to choose between data and food.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, London has been terrible. I have friends, very dear friends in London who've been very deeply touched by the pandemic. So I think what it has shown us, not so much from the technology point of view, and we've had one-to-one laptop programs, we've had multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar Rudd revolution and so on, a previous prime minister and so on. But what it's actually overarchingly what it's shown, I think the broader community and from a policy perspective, it's given a renewed interest in the work of teachers, which I think is obviously a very good thing. And parents have perhaps appreciated the work that we do as teachers in a very different way to what I think that possibly they had those perceptions prior to the pandemic, and even having to school their own children at home in New South Wales for that 8-week period. It really shone a light on the work of teachers. And so that, I think, has shifted a whole range of perceptions about workload of teachers, about the role of endgame assessments, for example, and also about the importance of, I guess, how face-to-face teaching is a really valued part of, I guess, civil society more broadly.
Yeah, thank you. James, tell me from where you sit, where you're navigating in the international school setting, the connectedness between home and school, very actively, with your parents also being your customers, it's pretty hardcore. But you then got a connectedness with tech companies trying to sell you things. Are those connections properly happening? And then within the international school world and just generally between countries, do you get a sense that the ecosystem is working, that we are learning properly from each other?
That's a good question. Just to pick up on a point that Jane made, on our first day of online learning, I had a message from a parent that said, teachers should be paid $1 million a day. If this is what they have to do every day, my God, right? So I guess let me come to your let me come to answer your question in a roundabout way, which is to say, I wonder what this conversation would have been if COVID had hit 25 years ago. We certainly wouldn't be meeting on a Zoom call. We certainly probably wouldn't even be meeting and talking. So what's happened in the last 25 years has been, we do have access to devices, and usually in international schools, we do have a one-to-one program. So we're very privileged and very lucky with that. We do have access to, to the internet, to electricity, to a place to work. So that's another benefit. Again, I don't want to take that for granted either. One of the elements that international schools often don't have, though, is a clearly articulated curriculum. So those learning intentions in international school environment aren't always as clear as they are within a national school system. So one of the things that we often find is that schools have access, they have the one-to-one, they have teachers that are highly trained and have been integrated well into a world of technology and the appropriate application. Often in international education with international schools, the problem is, remind me what the intended learning was again? Am I supposed to be making up the content as well? And so it's this additional pressure on teachers to not only come up with the how, but also the what. And that's an element that we haven't done enough of, I think, interconnecting international schools. I think we're pretty good with the application and the pedagogy. We're not necessarily so refined in terms of the intended learning, something that national systems just take for granted.
Cool. And Hugo, what's your take?
Well, my take is that, well, I've heard so much so far and I had so many things to put on, but well, in terms of your point of connection and communication, I think well, the Portuguese example was well, just strike as a huge difference between, well, private schools that have means and have a level of parents in terms of their economic ability and education, and the difference between what happened on those private schools and on the public system was incredible. I can only say that from what I saw in the public system, teachers are heroes. The examples that we saw of how they tried to get to children that had no way to communicate, no way to contact with them, to get people on bicycles to distribute work to children that had no other way to be connected with. So on that sense, what I've heard so far, and and I heard the examples from Cecilia and from Ula, which I really relate with, from Uruguay, that are closer to what happened in Portugal, where there's a difficulty with lack of devices, lack of information, and lack of teacher training to actually be able to work under a different environment. And Estonia, that looks a lot more like where we would like to be in. One factor that might be interesting, and in this it's relevant in Portugal, it's the actual aging of teachers. So teachers in Portugal, just to give us an idea, the last statistics from Thales, I believe, teachers in Portugal are amongst the oldest in Europe. And so the average teacher's age, or if you want a small number, the teachers over 50 in Portugal in the last 10 years grew from 20% of the overall teachers to over 50%. This means that there are no young teachers coming into the system, which for sure makes it a lot harder for the system to adapt when it's shocked like it was. And saying this, well, once we see the technology that was lacking, not only from students and children that did not have computers and so on, that was also the Portuguese program, was to throw computers into the system, not really dealing with anything else.
And Hugo, is the stereotype that older people like me are more reluctant to use the technology? Was that borne out, that those older teachers really struggled to?
Well, there was more difficulty for sure, because people had to adapt a lot faster to methods that are not accustomed to be used for tens of years, and they have been teaching in a way for tens of years. It's not even a question of lack of wanting to. It's probably just the way to adapt if you don't have any let's say governmental support in order to develop them. And what Richard said in terms of the schools that prioritize teacher professional development is very relevant, because if you leave teachers without learning new skills for 20 years or 30 years, well, then when you need them to adapt, it's not easy to get them there. And on this, I wrote a sentence here while I was thinking, we need to make teaching sexy again, so that there are more young people that want to go into teaching and want to take that as a career, and that needs to be a priority, because if not, any time in the future that you want to impact change and to cause change, well, then it's not there, it's not happening. Very quickly, in terms of your communication and connection, well, we have discussions about this, but still schools are very closed systems. So what you saw in Portugal, and maybe throughout other countries, is the connections that were done are within the school system, within the education system, and nobody went out into. For instance, we saw also in London with the theater all closed and huge issues with the cultural people that deal with culture and work in culture, doing events, doing anything. All those people suddenly out of anything to do, and there was no reaching out to all those industries and all those services that stopped, that could have come into education and impact and change. And there was no effort done. It was still the education system talking to itself within itself. So that's my take.
Thank you. Ricardo, from sunny Rio, where we have been watching what's going on in Brazil with some alarm. But tell me, I mean, obviously, COVID's been it's huge. It's in a way been a motivator to push people on the adoption curve as teachers around the use of technology. Was there much in place before then in Brazil to motivate teachers to use it, or has this been, like everyone else, just a huge jolt with the incentive of having to, rather than some other incentive that might work?
I have two different answers for that. Overall, Brazil was a jolt, okay, because historically, technology for schools was always introduced in Brazil in a very, let's say, improper way. The first phase 20 years ago was always about devices and about the technology itself, and not about the learning solution that really helps teachers to do more. And that made teachers in school a little bit, actually not a little bit, a lot refractory to technology here, because in the past, always technology was force-fed into them in an improper way, okay? So, but last year, I was in a different position. I joined Square early this year. Last year, I was still at Somos Educação. Somos is the largest K-12 education business in Brazil. It provided content for almost 5,000 schools, over 1.5 million students here, and more than 100,000 teachers. And for the last 6 years, I was in charge of doing digital transformation within Somos. And we are targeting, Somos was targeting an IPO on NASDAQ that actually happened last year. And because of that, we are focusing beyond the current needs of school. We're focusing transforming Somos from a company that, a traditional education company that uses some technology, to a technology company that focuses on learning. And because of that, we had a platform that was way beyond the traditional, where the other platforms were in Brazil, Plural 12s. When COVID hit, for this reason, when COVID hit, we're in a more proper way to support schools, because we're targeting way beyond what schools needed. And Somos has one particular thing that made our perfect storm. Somos not only sells services and content to schools, Somos owned a lot of schools in Brazil, 50 schools all over the country. So Plural, the platform, was always developed hands-on with the schools and the teachers for the teachers. Because it's kind of, we asked, even before COVID, we always asked teachers to be superheroes, but there's no superpowers. No one is Wonder Woman, no one can be Superman. But we can make an Iron Man suit for the teachers. They can be a regular human being that's technology enhanced to do more. That's what's happened to doctors over 100 years, over the last 100 years. Doctors are instrumentalized. They can see inside the body and see what's happening. They don't have to guess anymore. So we always believe that the real transformation is not technology itself. It's about moving from educating based on what you think you know, to educating based on what we really know. It's moving towards an evidence-based approach. Technology helps you get analytics all the time, so you can be more data-driven in terms of fine-tuning education. And because of that, because of Somos was already inside 5,000 schools in Brazil, provided content to over 100,000 teachers in Brazil, that we could develop this kind of Iron Man suit for the teachers here at Somos service. Not all teachers and all schools that could use the platform before COVID were using the platform, but a lot of them were already. What happened in COVID is that all schools that Somos provided regular physical books, for example, jumped into Plural right away. But the platform was ready for that because it was looking beyond current needs. And then we jumped to a point where every day we had online classes on Plural. We had teachers really using the platform to provide a full digital experience to the students. But because the platform was always developed hands-on with the teachers for them, was their Iron Man suit. And the result was amazing for Somos, but it's not the reality for the overall of Brazil. The overall here, public reaction was very uncoordinated and very, the gap between public and private in Brazil is way bigger now post-COVID because the public response is still not good. And we have the schools have been closed here since last March. They briefly, partially reopened sometimes, but they are still closed at this point. So, but in between a part of Brazil, we are successful in providing a great experience.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. That's really interesting. Look, I kind of, in the remaining bit of time, it's going to have to be a bit of a free-for-all. So just, pitch in as you're interested. But I just want to use the time to explore the change because, the pandemic has challenged everyone and especially teachers. They've been heroic, as we've discussed. And a lot has changed and a lot could be permanent, but a lot could be turned back by decisions that we can all make and choices that we all make. And some things do need to go back. You know, not everything has been perfect about this pandemic. So what you know, I see the relationship between parents and school has shifted. I see the relationship between parents and teachers and that respect may have shifted. I see the gaps widening. What do you think will have changed permanently as a result of all of this? And how, if teaching, as we've discussed, is the core thing of how we develop and value teachers, how do we ensure that we don't lose a whole bunch of them once the pandemic is over and they feel confident to get a job somewhere else? Cecilia, you were nodding, and then Gavin was nodding, so that's enough of a reaction to pull you in, and then I'll get Ulla. Cecilia.
Well, what a topic. There was a very interesting nationwide analysis of who is selecting the teaching profession nowadays in Uruguay. Here, it's people that had trouble in school or in their education system. So they are already people that they don't have the strong cultural background that actually the people that are making decisions. And even though we know that, we act like that is not happening. And what I heard before was James was saying we need to treat them or pay them $1 million salaries. Even if we don't have the $1 million, we need to treat them as $1 million professionals. What we don't. Actually, what we don't. And I quote a phrase I heard yesterday, it was about assessment, but I think it totally fits, is society don't believe our words that they are $1 million because they don't match our actions. And once again, we put the teachers, we say they are superheroes, but we're surrounded with kryptonite and we blame them of not being able to cope with all of the things that we know would not allow them to be successful in the end. And I think that is completely unfair. So just 2 points. One is the mindset. For us, a breaking discovery that we did at the NGO was, first of all, acknowledge uncertainty is happening. Acknowledge the pandemic is there. Don't try to deny it, like we will get on board and everybody is joining and make this, that is not what really going on. So acknowledge uncertainty, acknowledge the challenge, and then create a culture of turn the challenge into an opportunity and create everyone to be on the same path and prioritize. Say, this is what we're going to focus. Number one is the human relationship. Let's the conversation go in between the people that have a connection, the teacher and the learner, the teacher and the families. Let prioritize that they show up. That would be my at least that mindset, culture, and empowerment of the teachers.
Thank you, Gavin.
Building on the back of that, and absolutely, and kind of developing the social frameworks in which things can work better, and so that people can work together better. I think it's sad that we focus very often on the technological aspects, whereas actually, if we focused on actually what are the social physics that are involved. So Alex Pentland's written a very good book out of MIT talking about social physics, and there are things that have come up in the past that I've used, and it's not, this is not imposing collaboration on people. This is actually opening the doors to an opportunity. So don't impose, but things like the self-review framework, which was MACES, and which was a way in which a school could engage with all the people that were stakeholders in that school. So everybody, you know, the teachers working there would do it, would be part of it. The pupils would be, the parents would be, the community around the school, and to discuss how are we doing with technology and how do we actually improve. But that kind of social fabric provides an awful lot of learning. I think the Connected Educators Week that Richard would know more about, but when that was coming up in the United States, that building the connection between educators so that we're sharing and the opportunities for people to connect and work on that better. And I think, I use those kinds of techniques I worked with Malta in developing their digital strategy in the early 2000s. That kind of thing, I think, worked well. I think one other thing I'd add to that, as we're thinking about innovation and as we're connected to the technological part, I give credit to the, and again, this is for what came out of the US Department of Education EdTech Development Guide. I just love the little box that says, innovate, don't digitize. So as we're stepping forward, don't be thinking about digitization and trying to digitize there what's there already. Think about the kind of education we want, the kind of society we want through education, and how then, with the innovation that entails, how can we build the things technologically and otherwise that can support it.
Thanks, Kevin. I've then got Ulla, then Samson, then Hugo.
Just maybe to add on some aspects into this discussion as we are closing already this panel. And if I understood correct your question, Jim, then you were asking that which are the trends or changes what actually now here to stay because of the situation what we come through. And I think that I can talk about technology, I think, for an hour with a big passion. And I think that one thing, but definitely still has changed now, is everyone is understanding that how actually this technology can prevent or help, and actually importance. I wrote here some notes as well regarding now this digitalized learning materials and content and the way how we are learning and teaching. I think this will not come back in the same way as it was like 1 year ago. Maybe the second topic I would like to actually put here as well, I think that I don't know how it's in other countries, but what we have now achieved, I think education has been all the time very important in our country, I think already for 100 years, but I think that now we feel that there is some kind of demand from the learners as well. And this is that actually students want to learn. They understand that the gaps are coming if they do not learn. And this is, I think, a momentum what we haven't had maybe in so visibly in the air, that there is a need or demand. And I think that everyone understands that the role of the teacher is just becoming more and more important. And the last point I would actually would bring here, and I think it's a separate panel, I would say that I think that this understanding of this educational ecosystem, that actually everyone has taken only, let's say, this is assessment, or this is tools, or this is teaching, or this is, I think everyone now understands that how it actually is connected, and actually how we are dependent on each other as well. And I think that this is the knowledge that we now need to bring further, because this is only through co-creation, engagement, and that type of things we can actually reach the better solutions for our learners.
Thank you. After Hugo will be Richard and Jane and James. So we got quite a queue. Samson.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting conversation, and kind of speaking to the trends, but kind of to a broader point. I think one of the things that I worry about with technology is that it's moving us to a more consumptive model of education. That means that, you know, when you have your phone, it's not a tool for creation, or you have your laptop, and in education, it's not used as a way of creating things. It's used as a way of consuming content. And I think that having that, and that trend, I think, is one that's really worrying. And so I would kind of say that what we maybe need to start thinking about is how can we start building creative tools that allow us to do education, rather than having, yes, okay, so you can interact with it, and yes, you get fantastic data out of it, but how can we actually teach students to create things? You know, there's a lot of work by people like Alan Kay and Victor, Seymour Papert, with their kind of logo, where it was about teaching mathematics through creation. And that's one of the things that digital tools allow us to do. They allow us to do amazing, you know, things in Photoshop. They allow us to design fantastic things. But students, I don't feel, or things aren't designed for students to be able to do that creation. And I think that that is something that, even when we talk about co-creation of these learning platforms, no one's talking about what can students actually do with that, and how can they learn to use those tools and be within that kind of digital world to create things. And I think that's something that I don't feel like is really talked about enough in the kind of education technology space. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Cool. So quick comments now, because we're in the last 5 minutes. Hugo.
I'll go as fast as I can. Well, my views, and we've discussed, is to bring other industries best practices into education. And I would just like to give a small example. Gavin spoke about society and what education needs to deliver, what society is looking for in the future. That's more or less the why. Why do we need it? And the what needs to be research based, needs to be based on what we know is the best. But the how is where I believe a lot fails. And I'll just give an example. If you look at a successful industry of an example, Toyota, that decades ago became an industry leader by going bottom up instead of top down. So they went into the factory workers and said, how can we improve? How can we be more efficient? How can we produce better and with more quality? So they went where the work is actually performed and not just the concept. And I believe that education needs to do a lot of that. It needs to go into the students and teachers where the work is actually performed and see how they want to change, how they can believe it can be improved, and then create the resources in order to deliver it. Because if we keep with the top-down approach,
actually, Hugo, that is a digital mindset. That's how digital product is designed. You go to the user experience and embed yourself in that design thinking. Richard.
There we go. Let me just make a very quick sort of final point that I feel is important to get in here. And that is, I've spent decades studying innovation. When I worked for the White House, I did this. When I worked as a chief innovation officer for a state in Rhode Island, I've spent a long time looking at how innovation happens in large systems. And there's some history that we can learn that I would like to just quickly share. And that is this. Every time we have a massive disruption, right? When there's a big disruption, there's always a bloom in innovation that happens after the disruption. And so there's some good news here is what I want to say. But there's a caveat that I have to get in that sometimes we forget, is that when you look at those situations, the disruption does not cause the innovation. It is not causal. The disruption sets the conditions for innovation and for smart, caring people to take advantage of those conditions to make great things happen. And that's the moment we're in right now. We are in this moment where we've had disruption. The conditions are set optimally for innovation. And we have a choice whether we can take advantage of it. And if we do, we will be able to truly transform the future of education. If we don't, it will, I promise you, it will go right back to how things were before. And so our goal, everybody on this call right here, our job is to make sure that we take advantage of this moment. And if we do, I think we will look back in 5 to 10 years and say, this time, this COVID moment is actually the best thing that ever happened for education, which is weird to say right now because I know we're in the middle of the trauma and the pain, but if we use the conditions that are set to lead to the innovation, this could truly be one of the most transformational moments in education.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I almost want to stop there, but yeah, Jane, I saw the comment from you about how education becomes a priority because of the learning loss, and so ministers decide to beat up teachers. That's kind of a little bit of the story that we have here with a massive disruption of teacher training being talked about. Any final reflection from you?
Yeah, look, it's been a really interesting conversation, hearing all those perspectives from around the world. But I do think if there's one thing I could, make a final point about, is that in Australia, it's actually forced, I guess, education systems, school leaders to think about the final years of schooling differently. If I can just focus on those last couple of years. So I guess sort of thinking about other alternatives to endgame assessments, the high school certificate, equivalent to your A levels and things like that. So there are conversations now about the use of e-portfolios, looking much more closely at the way that students monitor their time and prepare for their learning and to be those independent learners, post-school. So I think that it is forcing a reconsideration of those final years of schooling.
Okay, cool. I think, James, you probably get no, you're done. Well, we're done. It's 1 o'clock in my time, and it'll be a different time for everybody else. Thank you so much. That was incredibly rich, as I thought it would be. I knew it would be. It was slightly mad trying to get all the voices in, but that's all part of the fun. And we're hugely grateful. And yeah, good luck with the rest of your day or your tomorrow, if that's just around the corner, Jane. And let's keep in touch and keep the conversation going. And thank you to Roland for hosting us.
Thank you very much, Jim. Yeah, same to everybody. Wonderful contributions from all of you. Very valuable. Thank you for coming along. I won't keep you here because some of you do have to go to bed, it seems, and other people do have to get back to work. Thank you, and I'm going to be closing down the room.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Take it easy.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.